Friday, a strong Pacific storm hit southern and central California. Heavy rains driven by wind-downed power lines electrocuted a man. They also stranded others in flooded areas and interrupted hundreds of flights at airports. More than 300 arriving and departing flights were delayed or canceled at Los Angeles International Airport, with the storm feeding on atmospheric moisture stretching far out into the Pacific. Precautionary evacuations of homes in some areas were requested due to the potential for mudslides and debris flow.
Climate change is about more than extreme weather and rising sea levels. Scientists think the warming planet will affect your health, too. It will change what we eat, where plants and animals live, and even how we interact with each other. While unchecked climate change is expected to cramp the global food supply, it will also make the food that does grow less nutritious. Crops grown when there's more CO2 in the air have less iron, zinc, and protein, which isn't good for anyone who depends on them for a balanced diet. Scientists expect that disease-carrying mosquitoes and ticks will start spreading to more climates, where people haven't had to deal with infestations before. And analysis of dozens of studies on crime and conflict shows that as the climate gets more extreme, conflicts get more likely. And this is true whether climate anomalies last for hours or decades, and whether it's two people in conflict or whole countries. These are problems we're already seeing, but scientists and activists are busy discussing what can and is being done to make sure they don't ever get out of control. Scientists have seen dramatic shifts in when and where snow falls, and the change could mean trouble for hundreds of millions of people. According to a NASA report, in the Northern Hemisphere, snow cover has shrunk by 1 million square miles since 1967. Snow is vital for water security in some parts of the world. The report says more than 1.2 billion people rely on meltwater from seasonal snowpack and glaciers. In the western U.S., NASA says melting snow makes up at least 70% of water resources, so changes in snowfall change the water supply. Timing of the snowfall also makes a difference. For example, earlier spring runoff tends to prolong droughts. That's bad news for states like California, which has suffered a multi-year drought. Other parts of the world could see similar effects. A recent study found warmer global temperatures may cause the Alps to experience a shorter winter season and lose as much as 70% of its snow cover by the end of the century. While it is still too early to determine this year's average global snow accumulation, scientists are already seeing changes in snowfall patterns. Many of the recent winter storms arrived earlier than average. But scientists are tracking these changes, on Earth and from space. NASA recently launched its SnowX campaign, which measures not only how much snow is on the ground at any given time, but also how much water is in that snow. The campaign expects its first results in the next couple of years.
Science magazine reports that many Himalayan glaciers are receding, and a study of 32 glaciers around Mount Everest has found that those terminating in lakes have lost more ice mass than landlocked glaciers. That's a worrying trend because many glacial lakes form behind unstable debris dams that are poised to collapse and send disastrous floods hurtling down valleys. Himalayan glaciers are losing ice mass because of decreased snowfall and higher average air temperatures that melt existing ice.
Every year, roughly 15 million babies are born prematurely, and now scientists think the air we breathe is partially to blame. Estimates in a new study have linked up to 3.4 million premature births to pregnant women breathing fine particle matter, or air pollution. According to the study, the highest number of those births are in South and East Asia, the Middle East, and some African countries. The study does have limitations. There's not a whole lot of research on preterm births in some highly affected areas. Other factors like poverty, infection, education, and psychological health also come into play. Still, researchers believe a reduction in air pollution in the areas where it's most prevalent could mean fewer babies being born too early. And that's an important finding. According to the World Health Organization, complications from premature births are the leading cause of death for children under 5.
In another step towards getting humans ready for longer space missions, astronauts on board the International Space Station successfully harvested a new batch of produce. An agency news release notes, after spending nearly a month tending to the International Space Station's first crop of Chinese cabbage, astronaut Peggy Whitson harvested the leafy greens on February 17th. NASA further notes, while the space station crew will get to eat some of the Chinese cabbage, the rest is being saved for scientific study back at Kennedy Space Center. This is the 5th crop grown aboard the station and the first Chinese cabbage. The crop was chosen after evaluating several leafy vegetables on a number of criteria, such as how well they grow and their nutritional value. As space tends to dull astronauts' taste buds, NASA says there is a backup plan to ensure the crew's culinary delight. If the fresh Chinese cabbage they grew doesn't awaken their taste buds on its own, packets of ranch dressing were also sent up. As we set our eyes on manned missions to Mars and other distant worlds, the ability to produce food away from Earth will be essential. On Thursday, NASA announced an exciting find in connection to its exploration of Ceres. A news release notes, NASA's Dawn mission has found evidence for organic material on Ceres, a dwarf planet in the largest body in the main asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. Scientists using the spacecraft's visible and infrared mapping spectrometer detected the material in and around a northern hemisphere crater. Organic molecules are interesting to scientists because they are necessary, though not sufficient, components of life on Earth. NASA further notes, the discovery adds to the growing list of bodies in the solar system where organics have been found. Organic compounds have been found in certain meteorites as well as infrared from telescopic observations of several asteroids. Ceres shares many commonalities with meteorites rich in water and organics. Scientists have developed a genetically modified hen, which they hope can one day act as a surrogate egg producer and carrier for rare breeds. According to a news release by the University of Edinburgh, a team used a genetic tool called Talon to delete a section of chicken DNA. After modifying a gene associated with fertility, they were able to end up with hens which were the release states, unable to produce eggs but were otherwise healthy, the team found. It goes on to explain, researchers say that donor primordial germ cells from other breeds could be implanted into the gene-edited chickens as they are developing inside an egg. The surrogate hens would then grow up to produce eggs containing all of the genetic information from the donor breeds. One of the principal researchers, Dr. Mike McGrew, has since commented that these chickens are a first step in saving and protecting rare poultry breeds from loss in order to preserve future biodiversity of our poultry from both economic and climate stresses.
The Associated Press has reported the Trump administration considered deploying the National Guard to round up people living in the U.S. illegally, according to a draft memo. Almost immediately, administration officials called the story false. The draft memo, dated January 25th, appears to be from the Secretary of Homeland Security, General John Kelly. It called for as many as 100,000 National Guard troops to help with immigration enforcement. Those troops would come from states that border Mexico, as well as adjoining states. The document says governors in each of those states would decide if their National Guard would participate. We should note, the Associated Press said the move is just a proposal the White House considered and not an official plan. White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer called the report, quote, 100% not true, but didn't say if the administration had ever discussed the plan. A spokesperson for the Department of Homeland Security also said the report was false. The Associated Press says it asked both the White House and Homeland Security for comment before the report went live, but neither responded to the request. The report comes as hundreds of people were detained by immigration and customs enforcement agents across the U.S. in the past few weeks. It also comes as the Trump administration deals with a number of leaks from the White House. President Donald Trump said Thursday he'd directed the Justice Department to investigate recent leaks as a criminal matter.
Oh yes, she's actually considering ideas.
This campaign is about defending our constitutional democracy. And it's also a test. It's a test of the patriotism of all Americans. It's a test of the patriotism of Congress. We are confronted with a president who does not understand and does not respect our Constitution, who does not understand and respect our American traditions, our American values.
The petition and the names on the petition all gathered since Inauguration Day, when the violation of the Constitution's foreign and domestic emoluments clauses began. Those names are markers, they're indicators, they're reflections of widespread concern, anger, and commitment from people around the country.
The former British Prime Minister Tony Blair is calling on his countrymen to prevent the country's exit from the European Union. Blair says those who voted yes in the Brexit referendum didn't realise the full consequences of the decision.
Yes, the British people voted to leave Europe, and I agree the will of the people should prevail. I accept right now there is no widespread appetite to rethink. But the people voted without knowledge of the terms of Brexit. As these terms become clear, it is their right to change their mind. Our mission is to persuade them to do so.
Meanwhile, the EU and the US are at loggerheads over NATO's budget. Latest on this is that the European Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker said that Europe must not increase military spending, despite Washington insisting otherwise. On that side of it, the new US Defence Secretary has been demanding that NATO members meet their spending pledges. Some countries haven't been, or see America, quote, moderate its commitment to the alliance.
It's a fair demand that all who benefit from the best defense in the world carry their proportionate share of the necessary cost to defend freedom.
Washington's demand is part of Trump's plan to secure more funding to modernize the US Army, although some believe far too much is already being spent on war.
Our infrastructure, our dams, our bridges, our roads are crumbling. We've deindustrialized the country. The only thing we make anymore are weapons, which add nothing to the economy. And that's how empires die. They expand militarily beyond their capacity to sustain themselves. Martin Luther King understood this when he got up and said that we can't have economic justice while the military expands into country after country, which we're seeing with expansion of NATO in Eastern Europe or the wars in the Middle East. So it is militarism and empire, which no political candidate, including Bernie Sanders, will ever name because it's sacrosanct, which is hollowing the country out from the inside and destroying it.
And while Europe's reluctant to boost NATO funding, then, it seems the number of troops being deployed by the alliance in the continent's increasing. Poland, Romania, Bulgaria and the Baltic states are all hosting soldiers from across NATO's 28 member states, with more than 7,000 troops and hundreds of heavy armoured units in countries bordering right up to Russia. Such a massive build-up may look quite alarming, but European politicians claim it's due to Russian aggression.
We see is a more assertive Russia.
We cannot feel secure with such a Russia.
Threats and challenges emanating from the east.
We are implementing the biggest reinforcement of our collective defense.
And so this is a signal to Russia.
During the Warsaw Summit in July, NATO recognized Russia as the main threat to the alliance's security. For the first time since 1989, the containment of Russia was officially proclaimed as a new NATO mission and has led to the further expansion of the bloc. Now they found a new reason to do it, a more serious one. That's how they think.
Now, German Defense Minister Ursula von der Leyen has warned the new U.S. administration against dismantling the unity of Europe and NATO. Leyen says the U.S. well knows that its tone has a direct impact on the cohesion of Europe and NATO. She called on Washington to cherish transatlantic ties, cautioning the White House over its favoritism toward Russia. The German foreign minister also urged U.S. President Donald Trump over his travel ban, stressing that it should not target Muslims and Islam. Since taking the Oval Office on January 20th, Trump's controversial policies and his headlong rush to make hawkish decisions have been facing growing criticism both inside the U.S. and abroad.
All right, well, the U.S. military keeping a watchful eye on that Russian spy ship that's been prowling off the East Coast, traveling as far north as Connecticut, and at times coming extremely close to entering U.S. territorial waters. Fox News Pentagon producer Lucas Tomlinson joins us live with an update on the vessel's movements. And as I understand it, it's a 12-mile, there's 12 miles of room there before international waters start off the coast. And of course, they have been abiding by that, right?
That's correct, Sandra. That Russian spy ship is currently loitering just 17 nautical miles off the coast of Virginia, home to the world's largest naval base. And as you mentioned, U.S. territorial waters extend only 12 nautical miles away. Now, earlier this week, the Victor Leonov traveled up the East Coast as far north as Connecticut, home to a U.S. Navy submarine base, before reversing course and heading back south. President Trump acknowledged the Russian spy ship has gotten under some people's skin.
The greatest thing I could do is shoot that ship that's 30 miles offshore right out of the water. Everyone in this country is going to say, oh, it's so great. That's not great.
Here at the Pentagon, a short time ago, a spokesman was very candid about the Russian spy ship, saying, quote, it's lawful and similar to operations we do around the world. Last week, Russian jets buzzed a U.S. Navy destroyer operating in the Black Sea, 180 miles southwest of Russian-held Crimea, where NATO is conducting an exercise. And this week, 500 U.S. Army soldiers and some tanks arrived in Romania from a port in the Black Sea. Today in Munich, Defense Secretary Jim Mattis alluded to Russia, but did not name it by name.
We can no longer deny reality. As guardians for our nations and as sentinels for new threats, we all see our community of nations under threat on multiple fronts as the arc of instability builds on NATO's periphery and beyond.
A crack force of South Korean Marines land on a tropical beach. Off the coast, a frigate monitors the advance. Fighter jets sweep over the beach, dropping bombs to clear the path as amphibious landing craft make their advance, discharging Thai and US Marines, who disembark and secure the area. It's a rehearsal, part of the largest joint military exercises in Southeast Asia, led by the United States. The objective, to foster cooperation with allies in Asia and prepare US troops for operations in a new theater of war.
Oh, the temperature in Thailand is definitely a huge difference from the United States with the humidity. But as we're here for a week or so, we definitely get used to it. It's not so bad.
And the prospect of this training ever being used is now much closer than before. Rising tensions in the South China Sea as China and the United States closely monitor each other's movements. And recent statements from influential advisors in the White House suggest the Trump administration sees the prospect of military action in the area as a distinct possibility. That has led the US to rethink its military relationships in the region. 3 years ago, the Cobra Gold exercise was downgraded after Thailand's military coup. The US said Thailand must return to democracy before it could be considered a military ally again. This year, the tone was far more conciliatory.
The U.S. alliance with Thailand is a deep and enduring commitment. We look forward to Thailand's reemergence as a flourishing democracy because we need Thailand as a strong and stable ally. We need Thailand to get back to being the regional and global leader that it always has been.
But Thailand's military remains firmly in control and has made few concessions to democracy. In fact, despite the urging of the United States, the military junta has pushed back democratic elections year after year after year. Dr. Krunsak used to teach in the US and later became a Thai MP. He thinks the Trump administration is now likely to drop any major objection to the military government's failure to return democracy.
It has some say. Hence, U.S. would have to quote Thailand a lot more. And I suspect all the rhetoric is going to be slowly be more accommodating.
These exercises between US and Filipino Marines in 2013 were also designed to re-engage Asian allies as part of the US's pivot to Asia. But now President Duterte is talking of expelling all US soldiers within 2 years, and their long-time alliance looks severely strained. As the US contemplates its future in Asia, there are likely to be rough seas ahead.
The United States, South Korea and Japan have issued a joint statement condemning the DPRK for its test firing of a ballistic missile at the weekend. Thursday's statement said Pyongyang deserves even stronger international response for violating UN resolutions. The statement was released after top diplomats from the three countries met on the sidelines of the G20 foreign ministers gathering in Bonn. The DPRK Wednesday rejected a denouncement from the UN Security Council, saying it was exercising a sovereign right to self-defense. US Secretary of State Rex Tillerson reaffirmed Washington's commitment to defend its two allies, but did not respond when asked whether US would send a Terminal High Altitude Area Defense System, or THAAD system, to Japan.
There has been an increase in deadly fighting between Indian forces and pro-independence fighters in Kashmir. However, Indian troops are finding it very hard to deal with the situation, less due to the gunfight and more because of the massive crowd that gather near the encounter sites. People often clash with troops in a bid to help the trapped fighters escape. The overwhelming participation of people in protests during and following gunfights has become a cause of concern for the security agencies. And now, for the first time in more than 2 decades of conflict, the Indian Army has issued a warning against civilians. Indian Army Chief Bipin Rawat has threatened those who try to rescue the pro-independence fighters of dire consequences, saying they will be considered as accomplices of militants and harshly dealt with. The statement has evoked widespread condemnation in Kashmir across the party lines. Pro-independence leaders believe it will only add fuel to the fire and increase hostility in the volatile region.
The Army Chief's statement is lacking the political wisdom, diplomatic wisdom, and this is purely a threatening statement to the whole of the population of Kashmir. I think this threatening statement will force the many Kashmiri boys to join the armed struggle.
People here say instead of issuing threats, New Delhi must address the political aspirations of the Kashmiris. Last year, the region's police department had issued an advisory asking people to stay indoors during security operations. But it seems to have found no takers, as thousands of people continue to defy the police advisory. Scores of people have also lost their lives in the process. Kashmir has been the scene of deadly violence following the killing of a popular pro-independence fighter in July last year. So far, nearly 100 people have been killed in clashes between Indian troops and protesters who took to the streets to denounce violence in Kashmir.
The massive participation of people in protests reflects the reality of Kashmir. Observers believe as long as New Delhi refuses to shun its court-rigid approach and continues to ignore the political reality of Kashmir, things will only go from bad to worse.
Ukraine's facing rolling blackouts as the country's energy sector was switched to emergency mode on Friday. People were asked to save up electricity during morning and evening hours. Meanwhile, the country's biggest metal manufacturing plants are on the brink of an immediate shutdown due to the lack of coal.
The emergency state will allow for using the capacity of energy-generating companies more effectively. These measures, however, can affect the markets and may cause losses to the enterprises.
The emergency order was enforced amid a blockade of shipments of anthracite coal, which is extracted in the areas of eastern Ukraine controlled by pro-Russia forces. The key railway links are blocked by war veterans who demand Kyiv stop trading with pro-Russia forces amid the ongoing clashes. But the Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko said the trade glues the country together and gives jobs to thousands of people on both sides of the conflict line.
They don't block down control areas of Donetsk and Luhansk regions. They don't cause them any problems. They put the blockade on Ukraine instead. They block our fight to restore the country's territorial integrity.
The blockade has been blamed on the lack of progress in implementing the Minsk ceasefire deal to end the conflict in eastern Ukraine.
One cannot say that there is an enemy on the other side and at the same time trade with them. Sooner or later, people get tired of these contradictions. They call the situation a business on blood, so the blockade was meant to happen someday.
Eastern Ukraine is hit by a nearly 3-year-long conflict between the government and pro-Russia forces. The fighting has taken the lives of around 10,000 people. Kyiv estimates that the blockade can cost Ukraine's economy up to $2 billion and may undermine its fragile recovery. Many Ukrainians fear the lasting effects of the blockade if it's not lifted anytime soon.
Friday, a strong Pacific storm hit southern and central California. Heavy rains driven by wind-downed power lines electrocuted a man. They also stranded others in flooded areas and interrupted hundreds of flights at airports. More than 300 arriving and departing flights were delayed or canceled at Los Angeles International Airport, with the storm feeding on atmospheric moisture stretching far out into the Pacific. Precautionary evacuations of homes in some areas were requested due to the potential for mudslides and debris flow.
Climate change is about more than extreme weather and rising sea levels. Scientists think the warming planet will affect your health, too. It will change what we eat, where plants and animals live, and even how we interact with each other. While unchecked climate change is expected to cramp the global food supply, it will also make the food that does grow less nutritious. Crops grown when there's more CO2 in the air have less iron, zinc, and protein, which isn't good for anyone who depends on them for a balanced diet. Scientists expect that disease-carrying mosquitoes and ticks will start spreading to more climates, where people haven't had to deal with infestations before. And analysis of dozens of studies on crime and conflict shows that as the climate gets more extreme, conflicts get more likely. And this is true whether climate anomalies last for hours or decades, and whether it's two people in conflict or whole countries. These are problems we're already seeing, but scientists and activists are busy discussing what can and is being done to make sure they don't ever get out of control. Scientists have seen dramatic shifts in when and where snow falls, and the change could mean trouble for hundreds of millions of people. According to a NASA report, in the Northern Hemisphere, snow cover has shrunk by 1 million square miles since 1967. Snow is vital for water security in some parts of the world. The report says more than 1.2 billion people rely on meltwater from seasonal snowpack and glaciers. In the western U.S., NASA says melting snow makes up at least 70% of water resources, so changes in snowfall change the water supply. Timing of the snowfall also makes a difference. For example, earlier spring runoff tends to prolong droughts. That's bad news for states like California, which has suffered a multi-year drought. Other parts of the world could see similar effects. A recent study found warmer global temperatures may cause the Alps to experience a shorter winter season and lose as much as 70% of its snow cover by the end of the century. While it is still too early to determine this year's average global snow accumulation, scientists are already seeing changes in snowfall patterns. Many of the recent winter storms arrived earlier than average. But scientists are tracking these changes, on Earth and from space. NASA recently launched its SnowX campaign, which measures not only how much snow is on the ground at any given time, but also how much water is in that snow. The campaign expects its first results in the next couple of years.
Science magazine reports that many Himalayan glaciers are receding, and a study of 32 glaciers around Mount Everest has found that those terminating in lakes have lost more ice mass than landlocked glaciers. That's a worrying trend because many glacial lakes form behind unstable debris dams that are poised to collapse and send disastrous floods hurtling down valleys. Himalayan glaciers are losing ice mass because of decreased